1968, Utah Desert Army Survey Team. Their instruments failed, their compasses spun wildly, and when they fired at something that shouldn't exist, the bullets hit, but nothing bled. The report stayed classified for decades. When it leaked, investigators discovered the government had been there before. 1951. Same location, same phenomena. They knew. They always knew. This is Warborn Stories. You're about to hear the classified history of Skinwalker Ranch and the secret list of 17 locations the military will never admit exist. The theodolite wouldn't level. Chief Warrant Officer James Kellerman had been surveying for the Army Corps of Engineers since 1952, 16 years of leveling instruments across Korean mud and Nevada test ranges, and he had never seen a transit bubble refuse to settle. Not in wind, not on unstable ground, not ever. But here, on a flat limestone outcrop in Utah's Uinta Basin, the bubble drifted in slow circles like something alive, ignoring the plumb bob that hung perfectly still just 3 feet away. It was April 1968. The survey team had been on the Ballard Ranch for 6 days, mapping a proposed munitions testing corridor that would link Dugway Proving Ground to a new storage facility near Vernal. Routine work. The kind of assignment that meant someone in Washington wanted acreage far from population centers, where accidental detonations became paperwork instead of headlines. The ranch owner, a man named Ballard with skin like saddle leather, had taken the government's offer without negotiation. He'd watched them unload equipment from the Deuce and a Half with eyes that said he knew something they didn't. Kellerman adjusted the leveling screws for the 4th time, checked the optical plumb, confirmed the tripod feet were seated in bedrock. The bubble continued its lazy rotation, counterclockwise, completing 1 full revolution every 11 seconds. He'd timed it. "Sir, compass is acting hinky again." Specialist Morales stood 20 meters away, holding the survey compass at arm's length like it might bite him. He was 22, fresh from Fort Belvoir, still believed in equipment tolerances and manufacturer specifications. The compass had been spinning since 0600 hours, the needle whipping through complete rotations, sometimes pausing to point southwest, directly at nothing, before resuming its erratic dance. Kellerman pulled his own compass from his field jacket, Army issue MM 1950 Linsatic, designed for artillery forward observers, built to function near magnetic anomalies like power lines or metal deposits. The needle gyrated wildly, then snapped to point southwest with such force he heard the pivot click. He'd requisitioned a magnetometer from Dugway the previous day. It sat in its case in the truck, and he was beginning to wish he'd left it there. Some things you didn't want measured, some numbers you didn't want in official reports. The rest of the team was spread across Section 37, Township 2 South, Range 1 East, a 640-acre parcel of high desert scrubland that looked like every other piece of BLM land in the basin. Juniper and sagebrush, rust-colored soil, the Uinta Mountains forming a saw-toothed horizon to the north. Elevation 4,900 feet, average annual precipitation 10 inches, nothing that should cause instrument malfunction. Sergeant Vickers appeared from behind a juniper outcrop, moving fast. He was 43, a Korea veteran who'd seen combat at Chosin Reservoir and never talked about it. Kellerman had never seen him run. "We got a problem, sir. The benchmark's moved." "Say again?" "The USGS benchmark. We cross-referenced it yesterday. Elevation 4,912 feet, exactly where it should be. I just shot it again. Now it's reading 4,896 feet." Kellerman felt something cold settle in his stomach. USGS benchmarks were bronze discs set in concrete, surveyed to within 0.01 feet of accuracy, the bedrock reference points that made every other measurement possible. They didn't move. Tectonic shift occurred in millimeters per year, not 16 feet overnight. "You shot it twice?" "3 times, sir. Same reading. Either the benchmark dropped 16 feet into the ground, or we're 16 feet higher than we were yesterday. They broke for chow at 1300 hours, gathered around the truck tailgate with sea rations and thermoses of coffee that had gone cold. Nobody spoke much. Morales kept glancing at his compass, which now pointed steadily southwest, quivering slightly, like a dog on point. Kellerman retrieved the magnetometer, a Syntrex MP2 proton precession unit that cost more than his annual salary. He'd used one during the 1957 survey of Yucca Flat, mapping subsurface contamination after Shot Diablo, a 37-kiloton detonation that had scattered hot particles across 6 counties. The readings here made Yucca Flat look normal. Magnetic intensity, 72,000 nanoteslas. Earth's average magnetic field ran 45 to 50,000. Localized variations near iron deposits might spike to 55,000. 72,000 suggested a mass of ferromagnetic material roughly the size of a naval destroyer buried directly beneath their feet. Except they'd surveyed this section with ground-penetrating equipment 2 days ago. Soil composition, standard Uinta Basin alluvium over Mesozoic sandstone. No metallic anomalies, no voids, no anything. At 1435 hours, the magnetometer readings dropped to 38,000 nanoteslas in 4 minutes, no explanation. Kellerman logged it, triple-checked the calibration, and felt the weight of something career-ending pressing down on him. These numbers would require an explanation he didn't have. They worked until 1800 hours, packing equipment with the mechanical efficiency of men trying not to think. Kellerman filed the day's data in the survey log, noting instrument malfunction pending equipment inspection. Not a lie, not quite the truth, the kind of entry that might slide past review if no one looked too closely. The first shot came at 22:47 hours. Kellerman was in his tent updating the field journal by flashlight when he heard Vickers shout. Then, the flat crack of a M1911 pistol, 3 rounds in quick succession, the sound carrying clear across the basin's night silence. He grabbed his own sidearm and hit the ground running. The moon was 3 days from full, bright enough to cast shadows, and what he saw in those shadows stopped him cold. It looked like a dog. Moved like a dog. Except dogs didn't stand on their hind legs, didn't maintain bipedal locomotion for more than a few seconds, didn't have forelegs that bent wrong, reverse articulated, like something assembled by someone who'd only heard dogs described and never seen one. Vickers was backing toward the truck, pistol raised, hand steady, despite what Kellerman could see in his face. The thing watched him, head cocked, and Kellerman realized it was studying Vickers the way a man might study a mechanical device, trying to determine function. "I hit it 3 times, Vickers said, voice level. Center mass. It didn't bleed. It didn't run. It just looked at me." Kellerman raised his pistol, sighted on the thing's chest, and fired twice. The M1911 had stopping power sufficient to drop a man at 50 yards, had killed enemy soldiers in 2 wars. The bullets struck with visible impact, dust puffing from matted fur. The thing tilted its head the other direction, curious. Then it dropped to all 4s and vanished into the scrub with a speed that seemed to violate inertia, there one instant and gone the next. No acceleration, just binary states of presence and absence. Morales emerged from his tent wild-eyed. "What the hell was that?" Kellerman didn't answer. He was looking at the ground where the thing had stood, where 5.45 ACP rounds should have left blood or tissue or some evidence of ballistic impact. The soil was undisturbed. He knelt, ran his hand across the dirt, found the bullets half buried in sand, deformed on impact. With what? Air? The rounds had struck something solid enough to mushroom-jacketed lead. They broke camp at first light, loaded the trucks in silence, and drove back to Dugway without stopping. Kellerman filed his report that afternoon, classified confidential per standard protocol for proving ground assessments. Survey incomplete due to equipment malfunction and terrain unsuitability. Recommend alternative site selection. The words felt like a lie and a truth simultaneously, a bureaucratic schism that might protect his career or end it. 3 weeks later, a major from Army Materiel Command arrived at Dugway with questions Kellerman couldn't answer and orders he couldn't refuse. The major carried a briefcase with documents marked secret and dated 1952, survey maps of the same Uinta Basin acreage, the same Section 37, with handwritten notes in the margins. Avoid, persistent anomaly zone. Compass deviation, extreme. Optical phenomena reported. The notes were signed by a colonel whose name Kellerman recognized from Corps of Engineers history, a man who'd supervised surveys for the Nevada test site, who'd mapped Ground Zero for Trinity, who'd known what impossible looked like, and had learned when to stop asking questions. The major told him two things. First, the Ballard Ranch survey was terminated, the land quarantined under eminent domain, access restricted to personnel with clearances Kellerman didn't have. Second, Kellerman would sign a non-disclosure agreement, accept reassignment to a desk job at Fort Bragg, and never speak about what he'd seen. Kellerman signed. He spent the next 27 years filing paperwork, retiring as a lieutenant colonel with commendations and a pension, and the knowledge that somewhere in a classified archive there was a file on Section 37, and that file was getting thicker. Because whatever was out there, it had been there in 1952, it was there in 1968, and the government had known about it long enough to have a protocol. They just sent him anyway. Robert Bigelow made his fortune in real estate and budget hotels, a pragmatic man who built empires from undervalued land and efficient square footage. By 1996, he'd accumulated enough wealth to fund the kind of questions polite society didn't ask. The National Institute for Discovery Science existed in a legal gray zone between legitimate research and conspiracy theory, staffed by credentialed scientists willing to risk their reputations investigating phenomena the academic establishment had abandoned. The Ballard Ranch, renamed Skinwalker Ranch by locals who'd learned not to go there after dark, came on the market in 1994. The Sherman family, who'd purchased it 2 years prior, were selling at a loss. They didn't negotiate. They wanted out. Dr. Colum Kelleher stood in the ranch house kitchen reading the Sherman family's incident log, a spiral notebook filled with dates and observations written in increasingly erratic handwriting. Livestock mutilations, disappearing objects that reappeared in impossible locations, unidentified aerial phenomena, the gradual escalation from curious to terrified that characterized every good haunting narrative, except the Shermans weren't prone to hysteria. They were multi-generational ranchers, people who understood predators and weather and the rational explanations for most things that went wrong on remote acreage. What they couldn't explain was why their cattle turned up dead with surgical precision excisions, no blood, no tracks, no scavenger activity, or why their dogs vanished inside circles of flattened grass, or why something had torn a 300-pound calf from a steel corral, carried it across 200 yards of pasture, and deposited it on top of a 30-foot cottonwood tree. The calf incident had no rational explanation. Kelleher had examined the tree. The branches showed stress fractures consistent with sudden weight impact, but the trunk showed no claw marks, no climbing evidence, no indication of how a dead animal achieved elevation without mechanical assistance or human intervention. Bigelow's purchase came with conditions. The sellers wanted anonymity. They wanted the sale expedited. They wanted to be gone before winter, before the next cycle of whatever had been happening began again. NIDS took possession in October 1996. Kelleher assembled a team. 2 physicists, a veterinarian, a psychologist, and a former military intelligence analyst named Jim Stratton, who'd spent 20 years at the Defense Intelligence Agency and knew how to navigate classified archives. Stratton found the Army Corps of Engineers report 3 weeks into the investigation, buried in a Freedom of Information Act release from Dugway Proving Ground. The request had been for documents related to munitions testing site selection, routine stuff, and someone in the declassification office had missed the fact that one survey report contained references to anomalous phenomena. The report was dated May 1968, signed by Chief Warrant Officer James Kellerman, marked confidential, downgraded to unclassified in 1991 under automatic declassification protocols. 28 years locked away, and the bureaucrat processing the FOIA dump hadn't read past the cover page. Kellerman's language was careful, technical, the prose of a man trying to document the undocumentable without destroying his career, equipment malfunction, terrain unsuitability. But the attached survey data told a different story. Magnetic field readings that spiked to 72,000 nanoteslas, then dropped to 38,000 in 4 minutes. Elevation measurements that varied by 16 feet overnight. Compass deviation so extreme the instruments became useless. And buried in the appendix, a single incident report. Discharge of firearms, 2,247 hours. April 14th, 1968. Entity description: canine, bipedal locomotion, ballistic resistance confirmed, no casualties, no pursuit authorized. Stratton read the report twice, then made a phone call to a friend at the Army Corps of Engineers Human Resources Office, the kind of favor that meant drinks and discretion. James Kellerman had retired in 1995 as a lieutenant colonel, 27 years of desk assignments following a stellar field career. Current address, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Age 71. Status, alive. Kellerman agreed to meet at a Denny's off Interstate 95 neutral ground. Public enough to be safe, but not so public that conversations carried. He arrived 15 minutes early, ordered coffee, and waited with the patience of a man who'd spent a career waiting for orders that sometimes never came. Stratton slid into the booth across from him, placed a manila folder on the table, and said the only thing that mattered. "I read your 1968 report." Kellerman stared at the folder like it was a landmine. His hands, liver-spotted and steady, stayed wrapped around his coffee cup. "That report was classified," he said finally. "Declassified in 91, automatic review. Someone screwed up the redaction process. Your appendix made it through intact." Kellerman's jaw tightened. "Then you know I can't talk about it. Your NDA expired when the classification dropped. You're legally clear." Stratton opened the folder, slid across a photograph. The Ballard Ranch, from aerial perspective. Date stamped October 1996. "We own it now. Bigelow Aerospace. We're investigating the same phenomena you encountered. And whatever is out there is still active." They talked for 3 hours. Kellerman spoke with the precision of a man who'd spent 28 years not talking, each detail preserved in memory like evidence in amber. The theodolite that wouldn't level, the benchmark that shifted 16 feet, the thing that looked like a dog but moved wrong, took 5 direct hits from military-issue pistols, and walked away without bleeding. But it was the aftermath that interested Stratton most, the major from Army Material Command. The briefcase with secret documents dated 1952. The maps with handwritten warnings, avoid, persistent anomaly zone. There was a prior survey, Kellerman said. 52, maybe 51. Same location, same problems. The major wouldn't give me details, but he made it clear this wasn't new. The Army had been there before. They'd documented it before. And they'd decided the best response was to classify it and walk away. Stratton pulled out a legal pad, started taking notes. "Did the major mention who conducted the 52 survey?" "Colonel someone. I recognize the name but can't place it. The major showed me signature pages, classification stamps, official Corps of Engineers documentation. Whatever they found was deemed significant enough to warrant secrecy, but not significant enough to warrant further investigation." "Or they investigated and didn't like what they found," Stratton said. Kellerman nodded slowly. "The major told me something else, off the record. Said there were other sites, other locations with similar phenomena, magnetic anomalies, optical distortions, entities that didn't behave according to known biology. He said the Army had a list. He called it the exclusion registry. places where testing and development were prohibited, not for environmental reasons or political reasons, but because something was already there. Did he say how many sites? 17 at the time. In 68. Kellerman's hands had started shaking, slight tremor, the neurological echo of decades-old fear. He said most of them were in the Southwest, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona. Desert regions, minimal population density, areas where you could lose people and equipment without attracting attention. Stratton returned to the ranch with Kellerman's testimony and a growing suspicion that NIDS had purchased something more than anomalous real estate. They'd acquired a location that had been under observation for at least 44 years, possibly longer, by an entity with resources and authority to classify information above top secret. The question wasn't whether the phenomena was real. Kellerman's report, combined with the Sherman's documentation and NIDS's own observations, established pattern consistency across decades. The question was why the government had chosen containment over investigation. Dr. Kelleher set up monitoring equipment across the ranch's 480 acres, magnetometers, radiation detectors, motion sensors, infrared cameras, digital recorders programmed to activate on electromagnetic anomalies. They established baseline readings, documented the normal, created a framework for identifying the abnormal. The first anomaly occurred on November 14, 1996, at 0312 hours. 3 magnetometers registered simultaneous spikes to 68,000 nanoteslas, holding for 47 seconds before dropping to baseline. No corresponding seismic activity, no electromagnetic interference from power lines or atmospheric conditions. The sensors were positioned in a triangular array, 200 meters apart. The readings suggested a point source directly beneath the ranch's geographic center, depth unknown. Kelleher reviewed the data with the kind of methodical care that had earned him a PhD in molecular biology and cost him a tenure-track position at a university that didn't appreciate his interest in fringe science. The numbers were clean. The equipment was functioning. The phenomenon was measurable, repeatable, and completely unexplainable within conventional geophysics. 2 weeks later, something killed 6 cattle in a single night. The veterinarian's necropsy report documented exsanguination with no blood loss to surrounding tissue, surgical excision of reproductive organs with precision, suggesting laser or high-temperature blade, and core body temperature readings indicating the animals had been dead for less than 2 hours, despite rigor mortis patterns suggesting 12 to 16 hours post-mortem. The temporal impossibility bothered Kelleher more than the mutilations. Biology operated on fixed rates of decay. Rigor mortis followed predictable patterns based on temperature, muscle mass, and time since death. You couldn't have fresh blood absence and advanced rigor mortis in the same carcass, unless time itself was variable, unless whatever had killed these animals existed in a framework where cause and effect weren't linear. Stratton stood in the pasture where the cattle had died, looking at ground that showed no tracks, no blood spatter, no evidence of struggle. The animals were positioned in a rough circle, heads pointing outward like something had arranged them with aesthetic intention. His phone rang. Unlisted number. He answered anyway, heard a voice he recognized from 20 years of intelligence briefings, a voice that should not have known he was standing in a Utah pasture investigating dead cattle. "Mr. Stratton, you've been asking questions about the exclusion registry." Stratton said nothing. Confirmation was information, and information was currency. The registry was decommissioned in 1974, the voice continued. All documentation transferred to Defense Intelligence Agency archives, classified top secret SCI. Access requires cosmic clearance and executive authorization. You don't have either. I'm a civilian now. I'm just researching property I helped acquire. You acquired a mistake. The Ballard property should never have entered private sale. There was a bureaucratic failure at the Department of Interior. The quarantine designation was lost during a records digitization project in '89. By the time we realized the error, the Shermans had already purchased and occupied. So you let them stay. Let them experience whatever Kellerman experienced. Let them document it for 2 years before they couldn't take it anymore and sold. Stratton's voice was flat, the tone he'd used interviewing defectors and war criminals, people who'd made calculated decisions to destroy lives. You were running an observation post, using civilians as unwitting test subjects. Silence on the line. Then, "The phenomena is persistent, Mr. Stratton. It doesn't respond to human presence or absence. It simply is. The Shermans were not in danger. They were frightened. There's a difference. 6 cattle died last night. Temporal anomalies in the necropsy data. If this thing can manipulate time, then it's been doing so for at least 70 years, possibly longer. We have evidence suggesting Native American encounters dating to the pre-contact era. Geological surveys indicating magnetic anomalies present in 1893. This is not a recent development, Mr. Stratton. This is an ancient presence that occasionally makes itself known. Your research will document what has already been documented. Your conclusions will match conclusions already reached. And when you're finished, you'll understand why the government chose containment." The line went dead. Stratton stood in the pasture, surrounded by dead cattle and unanswered questions, and realized that NIDS hadn't discovered something new. They'd simply become the latest researchers to document something that had been carefully, deliberately ignored by people with the power to investigate properly and the wisdom to know they shouldn't. Somewhere in a classified archive, there was a file marked Exclusion Registry. Inside that file were 17 locations where reality operated under different rules, and the government had decided the American people were better off not knowing. He looked up at the night sky, at stars that had watched this valley for billions of years, and wondered what else was being carefully, deliberately ignored. The NIDS investigation ran for 8 years, from 1996 to 2004, accumulating data that should have revolutionized physics, biology, and humanity's understanding of reality itself. Dr. Colm Kelleher and his team documented over 400 discrete anomalous events, electromagnetic fluctuations that defied known principles, biological specimens with impossible DNA structures, aerial phenomena that violated conservation of momentum, and temporal distortions that suggested localized space-time manipulation. None of it was ever published in peer-reviewed journals. None of it changed scientific consensus. None of it reached the public in any meaningful way. What did reach the public was carefully curated, sanitized reports, ambiguous photographs, testimony filtered through layers of plausible deniability. Enough to fuel speculation, not enough to prove anything. The perfect equilibrium between disclosure and secrecy that characterized every government interaction with the unexplainable. Stratton spent those 8 years building a case for transparency, compiling evidence that met scientific standards, documenting phenomena with the rigor he'd once applied to foreign intelligence analysis. He believed, with the optimism of someone who'd spent a career trusting institutions, that sufficient evidence would force acknowledgement. He was wrong. In 2003, a DIA liaison visited the ranch. Not the voice on the phone from 1996, but someone younger. Someone who'd inherited the exclusion registry files and the responsibility for keeping them buried. The liaison carried credentials that opened every door and a briefcase containing documents Stratton wasn't supposed to see. They sat in the ranch house kitchen, the same kitchen where Stratton had first read the Sherman's incident log, and the liaison laid out the terms of engagement. Your research will continue, your funding will continue, But your findings will remain proprietary to Bigelow Aerospace, classified under commercial confidentiality agreements. No academic publication, no media engagement, no congressional testimony. Stratton had expected pressure, but not this. We're a private research organization. You can't classify civilian research. We can when that research intersects with ongoing national security operations. The phenomena you're documenting at this location is identical to phenomena documented at 17 other sites, all of which remain under federal jurisdiction. Your work here provides valuable comparative data for classified programs you don't have clearance to know about. Cooperation ensures continued access. Non-cooperation ensures legal complications that will consume whatever years you have left. The liaison opened the briefcase, removed a file marked Classified, Umbra, and slid it across the table. Inside were photographs Stratton recognized, the Ballard Ranch from various decades, aerial surveillance showing the same acreage in 1952, 1968, 1983, 1996. Each photograph annotated with technical data, magnetic readings, incident reports, casualty counts. Casualty counts. There have been deaths, Stratton said, reading incident summaries that mentioned personnel losses, equipment failures, disappearances attributed to training accidents, and administrative errors. 17 deaths between 1951 and 1992 across all registry sites, predominantly military personnel conducting surveys, security patrols, or containment operations. The phenomena is not actively hostile, but it is definitively lethal under certain circumstances we have not yet identified. The liaison retrieved the file, returned it to the briefcase with the finality of a vault closing. Your civilian team has been fortunate. The Shermans were fortunate. Kellerman was fortunate. Not everyone has been. Then why keep it secret? If people are dying, if there's an active threat, because the alternative is worse. The liaison's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd had this conversation before, who'd justified the unjustifiable until the justifications became reflex. In 1952, a research team from Los Alamos proposed comprehensive investigation of the Ballard site. Full scientific resources, unlimited budget, presidential authorization. The proposal reached Truman's desk. He rejected it, not because he doubted the phenomena was real, but because he understood what would happen if we confirmed it publicly. The liaison pulled out a different document, this one stamped with presidential seals and dated March 1952. A single paragraph, handwritten in margins. If we cannot explain it, we cannot control it. If we cannot control it, we cannot assure the public of their safety. Better to contain and monitor than to investigate and confirm our impotence. Truman's signature at the bottom, the hasty scrawl of a man making decisions that would echo across decades. NIDS published its final report in 2004, a carefully worded document that acknowledged unusual phenomena without drawing conclusions. The scientific community dismissed it as pseudoscience. The media covered it as entertainment. The government said nothing, which was its own form of confirmation for those who knew how to read institutional silence. Bigelow sold the ranch in 2016 to a shell corporation, later revealed to be connected to a Pentagon program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The program's existence was leaked to the New York Times in 2017, triggering a cascade of partial disclosures. Navy pilots encountering unexplained aerial phenomena, radar data showing impossible velocities, official acknowledgement that something was out there, and the government didn't know what it was. But the exclusion registry remained classified. The 17 sites remained unnamed. The deaths remained attributed to accidents and equipment failures. The policy of containment over investigation remained unchanged. Kellerman died in 2018, age 91, having spent 50 years not talking about what he saw in 1968. His obituary mentioned a distinguished military career in service to the Corps of Engineers. It did not mention the theodolite that wouldn't level, or the benchmark that moved 16 feet, or the thing that took 5 bullets and walked away. Stratton attended the funeral, stood at the graveside with other veterans and family members who knew Kellerman as a competent officer and a quiet man. After the service, Kellerman's daughter approached him with a manila envelope, sealed, her father's handwriting on the front. "For Jim Stratton, if he outlives me." Inside was a letter, typewritten, dated 1 week before Kellerman's death. The letter was 6 pages, single-spaced, the detailed recollection of a man who'd spent half a century remembering what he'd been ordered to forget. Kellerman described events from April 1968 that hadn't made it into his official report. Additional encounters with bipedal entities, equipment failures that suggested intelligent interference, and a conversation with the major from Army Materiel Command that revealed more than Kellerman had admitted to Stratton in their 1996 meeting. The major had told him about the first survey, conducted in 1951 by a team led by Colonel Marcus Webb, a Manhattan Project veteran who'd helped select the Trinity test site and understood anomalous phenomena better than most. Webb's team had spent 3 months at the Ballard Ranch, documenting magnetic variations, temporal distortions, and entities that defied biological classification. Webb's final report recommended immediate cessation of all military activity in the area, permanent quarantine, and reclassification of the site as above top secret, cosmic. The report included a conclusion that had haunted Kellerman since 1968, typed in all capitals on the final page. This phenomenon predates human civilization. It is not terrestrial in origin. It is not under human control. Any attempt to weaponize or exploit it will result in catastrophic consequences we cannot predict or contain. Webb died in 1953, officially from a heart attack, age 48. His report was sealed under classification protocols that made it inaccessible even to presidents without specific need-to-know authorization. The exclusion registry was established 6 months later, codifying a policy of identification, containment, and absolute secrecy for sites exhibiting similar characteristics. Kellerman's letter ended with a question he'd spent 50 years unable to answer. If there are 17 sites in the United States alone, how many exist worldwide? How many governments have made the same decision to contain rather than investigate? And what does it mean that this phenomenon has coexisted with humanity for thousands of years, making itself known just often enough to be documented, but never often enough to be undeniable? Stratton stood in his office at Bigelow Aerospace, holding Kellerman's letter, surrounded by 8 years of research that would never be published and answers that would never satisfy the questions. He thought about the liaison's visit in 2003, about Truman's handwritten note in 1952, about the policy of containment that had persisted across administrations and decades. The government had decided, perhaps correctly, that some truths were too destabilizing for public consumption, that confirming the existence of phenomena beyond human understanding would undermine the social contract between citizens and institutions, the assumption that authority derived from knowledge and control. But containment required complicity, required people like Kellerman to sign NDAs and accept reassignments, required people like Stratton to conduct research in private and publish nothing of consequence, required an infrastructure of secrecy that grew more elaborate with each generation, until the cover-up became more complex than the thing being covered. In 2024, the Pentagon released a report on unidentified anomalous phenomena, acknowledging hundreds of military encounters with objects exhibiting flight characteristics beyond known technology. The report noted that some incidents occurred in specific geographic locations with historical patterns of similar activity. It did not mention the exclusion registry. It did not name the 17 sites. It did not acknowledge 7 decades of deliberate institutional amnesia. Skinwalker Ranch became the subject of a television series, transforming genuine mystery into entertainment, legitimate research into spectacle. The public consumed it as fiction, which was perhaps the safest way to process uncomfortable truths. The government said nothing, which remained its most consistent policy. Stratton is 79 now, retired from research, living in Nevada with classified memories and unclassified regrets. He thinks about Kellerman sometimes, about the night in April 1968 when a warrant officer fired 5 rounds into something that shouldn't exist and watched it walk away. About the choice to document or to forget, to pursue truth or preserve sanity. The exclusion registry remains classified, buried in archives accessible only to personnel with clearances most people don't know exist. The 17 sites remain monitored, contained, unexplained. The phenomena persists, indifferent to human observation, operating under rules that predate human understanding of rules. And somewhere, in a facility Stratton will never see, analysts continue the work Webb started in 1951, and Kellerman witnessed in 1968, documenting the undocumentable, measuring the impossible, maintaining the fiction that humanity is alone and in control. The truth is classified, the lies are public record. And the thing at Skinwalker Ranch, whatever it is, continues doing what it has done for millennia, making itself known to those unlucky enough to find it, then watching as institutions more powerful than any individual ensure that knowledge goes nowhere. Kellerman's letter ended with a final sentence, handwritten beneath his typed signature. I pray you have the courage I lacked. Someone needs to tell them. Someone needs to break the silence before the silence breaks us. Stratton keeps the letter in a safe deposit box in Las Vegas, alongside 8 years of NIDS research data, Kellerman's original 1968 survey maps, and testimony from witnesses who saw things that will never be officially acknowledged. He has not released it. He does not know if he will. The weight of that decision grows heavier each year, the burden of truth competing with the wisdom of silence, the moral imperative. To disclose balanced against the institutional power to destroy anyone who tries. The government has kept this secret for 70 years. Maybe they're right to do so. Maybe some truths are too dangerous for public consumption. Maybe humanity isn't ready to know that something ancient and incomprehensible shares this planet, has always shared it, and cannot be controlled or understood or negotiated with. Or maybe that's exactly the truth we need to hear. The file remains sealed. The registry remains classified. And at 17 locations across the American Southwest, something continues its patient observation of a species that believes itself the dominant intelligence on Earth. It has waited for thousands of years. It can wait a little longer.